Hey, bloody New Orleans. So the your lesson for me today is a little more on the history side than on the ghost story and scary side, but it's also something that a lot of people in Louisiana don't know, and it's really, really important and really, really cool to know. So our lesson is on the 1811 slave revolt, and a lot of people think that slaves just kind of had people control them and that was it. They never fought back, blah, blah, blah. And that is completely not true. There were many, many times in the history of slavery in the United States where the slaves organized themselves and fought back against the people who were perpetrating all those injustices upon them. And one of those, actually the largest one in United States history, happened in Louisiana. So today that's what we're going to learn about. And by the time you're done, you'll have be able to explain to people what happened during the 1811 slave revolt. So, in general, you had 500 slaves in Louisiana who formed an army to defeat the slave owners and march on New Orleans. Their goal was to end slavery and to start a country where people who were slaves could be free. And in order to do that, they needed weapons, they needed organization, they needed a lot of people, and they needed to be able to get together and defeat the people that they're fighting against. So, this was not something that they just did overnight. It wasn't one person getting beat and getting angry and then deciding to go on a rampage. It took years and years of organization and planning. And remember, all these people that were doing this planning, if the slave owners found out, even for a second, or even thought that they might have been doing this, then those people would have been killed. So all the people sitting around the fire talking about what they wanted to do, or all the people who were conspiring between one plantation and another plantation, those people were putting themselves in danger throughout years in order to plan this event. When the day came, they started in a place called the Woodland Plantation up by Laplace, and they marched down. So they started and they killed the slave owners there. Right? They got together and they said, we're going to take this out. They went into the big house and they killed the slave owners. They made sure to spare the women and children, but they killed the guy who owned the place. And then they started marching towards New Orleans. They wanted to get to New Orleans because if they thought they could defeat the slave owner population in New Orleans, then they could take over the land and they could be the ones who make the laws in all around Louisiana. So they could be the ones who say that slavery is not legal. So they marched down the Mississippi River along this red dotted line, and they went to all these different plantations. At each of these different plantations, they're talking to the slaves who are there, and they're getting them to join their side. Most of the plantation owners had actually heard about the slaves coming, so they escaped and they got on their horses and drove really fast to New Orleans. So they're going from plantation to plantation to plantation, and as they go along there, they get more and more people. Then, once they hit this place by Rivertown, the Jacques Fortier plantation, there they encounter military troops because the slave owners who went to New Orleans, they went and got a bunch of troops and they got themselves guns, they got themselves horses, and they are going out so that they can defeat the slaves and then reestablish their control over everything. So right here is where they meet them, and then the slave owners actually win that first battle, and then they send the slaves retreating all the way back out through St. Charles Parish to where modern day Norco is, which is a town on the Mississippi River. Then there's another battle here at Norco, and in that one, the slave owners win, and they either capture the slaves either run away, or many of them were killed in that case. So this was actually a case where the slaves threatened the town of New Orleans and the integrity of the slave owning system, the plantation system. But in the end, the insurgents were defeated and the slave owners won the military battle. So this is a picture, this is a more modern day picture of what that battle looked like. And so you can see both sides have weapons, but the slave owner side was a little more organized, and they also had larger weapons such as cannons. They had significant advantage because they had more weapons, they had more ammunition, and they had more people who were coming to fight against the slaves. However, once the white slave owners won that battle, they did the same thing that Bloody O'Reilly did when he won against the French, and he executed the attackers, shot them, cut off their heads, and put them on poles by the Mississippi River. He wanted that to be a message to the people that this is what happens to you when you try to fight against the people who own slaves. So it makes it a little more interesting to think about why these people would be risking their lives to do what they did. And then while this was happening, you had two very different ideas about what was going on in this slave revolt. One, on this side, see if you can think about how this picture makes the slaves look and how it makes the slave owners look. Look at what the slaves are doing, look at who they are killing, and then think about how that makes them look. Exactly, it makes them look like animals, it makes them look savages, right? They're killing children, they're killing women, and that actually wasn't true. That didn't happen. The only people that were killed were the slave owners themselves, who were the ones who had perpetrated all the violence already. And if you look at this one was made by an African American artist about the same event. What does this one show? How is this one different than this one from over here? Exactly. This one shows people more organized, people who are together, people who are not perpetrating violence. They're not animals. They are people who are marching towards something that they want. You even have people with instruments, people carrying banners, because they're excited about the prospect of freedom rather than the prospect of violence. Today, people still talk about this event a bit, not nearly as much as they should. But there's a plaque right here in the Woodland Plantation, right by Laplace. And this guy, he's a tour guide who talks about the 1811 slave revolt. And so you can go and see the place where it started, and you can go and take the trail that the freed slaves who freed themselves took to try to attack New Orleans. There were lots and lots of other slave revolts in the United States history. To see the most famous one, you need to go to this website here, and then you can answer the questions about that slave revolt. So go to bit.ly/DTA revolt and watch the video about the most famous slave revolt in history. Then when you're finished with that, go to bit.ly/DTA revolt 1 to read about more slave revolts around the world. And most of these happened in the United States, but other ones happened in other places. You're going to need to read about those, so make sure you go to that website, because part of your grade for today is to tell us what you think about those other slave revolts that you read about. So once you're finished reading, then go to bit.ly/DTA revolt 2 and tell us what you think. Answer the questions about those slave revolts that you just read about. Have fun. Here's all the instructions together if you need to remember those links.